So I think it's critically important, for young entrepreneurs, like the best thing you can do is reach out to people cold. Like go on LinkedIn, look at somebody who has the experience that you're coveting and see if they'll talk to you. Because one thing I see is that the higher you get on the food chain in terms of corporate, org charts, the more generous people are. Why? Because they're good at their day job. They already have it nailed. And if they're an entrepreneur themselves, or they think they can help somebody else, people want to help. So I think it's critically important that you find, if you're doubting yourself and then the people around you, your friends, family, they're doubting you, find other people. Be around people that want to lift you up, people that want to challenge you. Find a place where you can go to work every day where there's other people building so you can share these experiences. And most importantly, find a mentor. Like if you can get a mentor, somebody who's walked a mile in those shoes, you're going to be better off.
You're listening to Freight Famous, presented by Rose Rocket, bringing you the people that make trucking move. From behind the scenes into the limelight. Here's your host, Justin Bailie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freight Famous, a podcast produced by Rose Rocket. New episodes of Freight Famous will be released about twice a month. On this podcast, we talk with guests about how they build, scale, and automate their trucking business. I'm your host, Justin Bailie, co-founder at Rose Rocket, and I'm super excited today to introduce my guest, Charley Dehoney. Charley is Vice President of ZEBOX America, an international incubator and accelerator focused on supporting innovative startups in the fields of transport, logistics, mobilities, and Industry 4.0. Since August 21, he has been building and leading ZEBOX America team based in Arlington, Virginia. Previously, he was the CEO of Freight Mango, a global digital freight marketplace focused on streamlining and automating global trade. Before this, he actually had acquired and managed Manning's Truck Brokerage, a 50-year-old privately equity-backed logistics company, which he successfully digitized, sold in 2020 to Fitzmark. Being a lifelong athlete, Charley's is passionate about coaching. Over the years, he has been a dedicated mentor, coach, angel investor for many entrepreneurs in the field of logistics innovation. I also hear as a side, I guess around this coaching thing, that you have some pretty avid, serious, skilled sons in the way of baseball. So maybe we can talk about that at some point too. Welcome, Charley.
Thank you for having me, Justin. I definitely do not deserve the introduction, but I appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
Well, my friend, it's the only way people will know who I'm talking to. So deserve it or otherwise, it has to be done. So thank you again. So I've got to know Charley a little bit over the last, actually relatively shortly. Charley came into my life as you should meet this guy from probably 3 separate people over a relatively short period of time. And we tried to connect, felt like for a long time, probably in the grand scheme of things wasn't. And finally when we did, we had a conversation with no agenda, much like today's show, I'll be honest. But really it was a conversation full of interest. I was just super interested in the conversation. The flow went well, and I'm hoping we can reproduce some of just what feels like 2 guys talking about the industry, 2 guys that are really, I think, passionate about technology in this space. And what we'll probably talk about a little bit is what I refer to, and it's not my own, but maybe you haven't heard this before, 0 to 1, in that that stage of business from ideation to just getting the bike up on the road and just starting to get the wobble out of it as you start going down the road. And I think from when we spoke, I found it felt like common friend from that 0 to 1 stage. So we'll probably spend a bit of time, talking about that today. So Charley, one thing I would, be interested in and just maybe a little bit of history on ZEBOX, what it is. And, when we talk about sort of incubators and accelerators, I think that means maybe different things to different people. So if you can kind of get us straight on just what ZEBOX is and what you do there.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks. Thanks for the cue there. So ZEBOX is a multi-corporate accelerator focused on supply chain logistics, mobility, and Industry 4.0. And so what that means is that we have multiple large corporate partners. These are companies from the supply chain that have come together to align themselves with the most innovative startups that are coming into the market today. So the history of ZEBOX goes back more than 4 years ago. I happen to be sitting in Marseille, France today, which is the headquarters of CMA CGM Group, the world's 3rd largest steam shipping company. And that business actually changed hands about 4 or 5 years ago when the founder, Jacques Sade, turned the business over to his son, Rodolphe Sade, who's now our chairman and CEO. And so Rodolphe immediately went to work on focusing on the same innovative spirit and the entrepreneurial sort of DNA inside of CMA that made it the global powerhouse that it is. And his concern in taking over the business was that same sort of vigor for innovation and changing things and trying new ideas, that wasn't going to exist in the company that was at that point, call it 30,000 people globally. So Rodolphe set out to study the kind of key themes in corporate innovation. And what he identified was that the companies that do it the best as far as innovating, they generally have an innovation group or focus outside of their own four walls. So they do it in a separate location. And that co-innovation, or like innovating with your trade partners and your customers to develop solutions for your industry, seemed to have a lot of potential. So he launched the project about 4 years ago in Marseille. That group initially kind of launched as more of your traditional European incubator model where, you know, maybe a founder with a good idea could go take up office space and, you know, be surrounded by other innovators and founders. And very quickly, the project morphed into more of an acceleration program. And so today, the group over here in Marseille has supported more than 75 startups, all in these kind of key sectoral areas that we're talking about. And early in 2021, Rodolphe told the team that they wanted to open the second ZBox hub in America. And they wanted this, you know, American hub to really be the flagship location for this global network of hubs that CMA is building. And the idea behind it was the United States has such a robust, mature startup market, venture capital market, that we wanted to create a location here within the ZBox network that could provide not only opportunities for acceleration and incubation for local, U.S. startups, but also provide a platform for global startups to find a soft landing when they want to come and develop their business here in the U.S. So I joined the group in August of 2021. Quickly went to work identifying talent, finding folks that come from the supply chain space, but have a real passion for startups and innovation and digitization. And then we aligned ourselves with 8 amazing corporate partners. So CMA CGM Group, as the steam shipping company, also owns SEVA Logistics. So that's our first 2 partners. And then we found 8 other companies that are trade partners of CMA that are titans of the supply chain, like some of the largest companies in America. And we've come together to form a multi-corporate accelerator that is problem-based. So what makes us unique versus the Y Combinators, the Techstars, the plug-and-plays of the world, all of these organizations are doing great work at advancing technology in the different areas that they focus in. We're a little bit different. We're vertically focused on the supply chain industry. So all of our partners here in the US are companies like CMA CGM Group, SEVA Logistics, BNSF, America's largest railroad, Project 44, the global visibility platform, all the way to companies like Cargomatic, the first digital trucking brokerage or digital freight marketplace in the US. Long before Uber was in the business, there was Cargomatic. Companies like Road One, the largest privately owned intermodal drayage carrier in the US, the Port of Virginia, Track Intermodal, which is the manager of many of the chassis pools that the steam shipping companies use. Ingram, which is the owner of Ingram Logistics, which operates all the barges up the inland waterways. And they also have a large content printing business in the print industry. So we've aligned ourselves with 10 companies. And what my team does at ZBox is we go out and we first sit down with these large corporates and we speak with their functional teams and identify pain points or areas where software or innovation can drive change in their business. And then we take these pain points and we summarize them in very simply written problem statements. And a problem statement is 2 to 3 sentences that can clearly define what is the problem, what might the solution look like, and how can we, ultimately get to that solution. And then we bring the problem statements back to the large corporations and we say, hey, you guys were explaining the area pain in areas like this. We believe that this is the right way to kind of describe that pain. Once we iterate off of that and we get alignment, we get agreement from the corporate partner, then we go out to the startup marketplace and we recruit startups that categorically or directionally at least can address some of these issues. So being that we're problems based makes it a little bit different. We only focus on startups that can make a material change in our partners' businesses, which thereby, means that they can make a material change in the industry. But secondly, and not less importantly, is we're not we're equity neutral. So we don't take equity or make investments in these startups. We're wholly funded at this time by our corporate partners and the dues that they pay each year to be as part of this community. So that makes us quite unique in the area of US accelerators and incubators, simply because we don't take equity. And so very long answer to your short question, but finally, there are two programs within the ZBox community for the startups. So we do a limited number of incubation projects. And these are generally a founder with a really great idea, but maybe they haven't built their team yet. Maybe they haven't raised any venture capital, and maybe their product isn't completely built out. So if any of those three boxes go unchecked, then we can work with that startup to help them develop their team, develop the messaging, get connected to the venture capital community, et cetera, and advance their project. What we've really focused most of our efforts on here in the US is acceleration of startups. So I mentioned earlier, we've got a really mature startup market over here. So we've enjoyed the benefit of working with companies that are about kind of pre-seed to maybe kind of like just post Series B. That kind of encompasses most of the startups that are in our community. We have 21 startups in the community today. We're adding 3 to 4 per month, just in all of these areas to address some of these problem statements. But really our value add and what we bring to the startup community is we sort of meet them where they are in their journey. So, as a multi-time founder and the leader of this project, it was important to me that I went out and got folks who had kind of been on that bus ride before and knew like where some of the divots were going to be in the road and can kind of help these founders get through these common problems that we've all kind of come across in our journeys. So we provide for the startups not only like refinement of their messaging, coaching on their pitch, access to a venture capital network with warm introductions, but we also, when the startup is ready and the product has been vetted and validated and our team at ZBox can really understand what it does, then we make these meaningful connections back into our corporate partner base. Because remembering back to the fact that we started with the problem first, and then we sourced the startup and sort of coached them and got them ready for this interaction, our real goal is to help these startups earn like meaningful commercial relationships within the companies inside of our corporate partner base.
That is, you're right, and that is novel. I think in terms of the no equity and fully sort of funded. Basically, your operation is by your for lack of simple term here, but sort of future customers of these startups or hope to be. Yeah, that is actually. So thanks for explaining. I think it warranted actually the explanation. That was really articulate too. So I think it wasn't a lot of wasted words there. So it worked well for me, and hopefully the listeners too. I guess maybe just to close the loop on that, how do startups find? How do you find the startups, or how do they find you? What does that actually discovery process look like there?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that we get connected to startups. The kind of top key ways are they find out about us through our network. As I mentioned, most of the folks on the team come from this ecosystem. So we have my number 2, our chief operating officer, is Patrick Duffy, who spent 3 years as the president of the Blockchain and Transportation Alliance before joining. And then our 2 entrepreneurs in residence are Elizabeth Ward, who comes from a lifetime of transportation because her family owns Ward Trucking. So she grew up in the LTL business in a regional carrier in the Northeast before working at Booz Allen as a supply chain consultant for a few years, and then went on to join early stage startups like Convoy and Transfix. And then our other entrepreneur in residence is a guy named Jonathan Rapp. He's based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he started his career with Access America before they were acquired by Coyote, and then eventually Coyote was acquired by UPS. So he was on that journey with them. And then John and I actually met at Airspace, where when I was the co-founder and we were building our early sales team, he joined us as one of our first sales reps. So kind of the core DNA of our team puts us in a great position to be networked with, folks that kind of know about what we're doing and can share the message to early stage founders. Of course, the VCs and the venture capital community that we work with closely to help our founders secure funding, they're quite interested in linking up their interesting projects with us in hopes that we can help them accelerate. If we find alignment and their startup is in line with one of the problem statements we have with our corporate partners, we can help them accelerate their growth and help those venture capitalists get the markup that they're looking for. And then not insignificantly, we have a steady stream of startups getting introduced to us through our corporate partners. So a company like BNSF or a company like Ingram in Nashville, Tennessee, is already being approached by large amount of startups on a regular basis who'd like to get their project exposed to Ingram. And so what we provide at ZBox is sort of a vetting and a validation layer.
Yeah.
So if one of our partners is approached by a startup, most of the time our partners, they're in supply chain. So they're in the weeds, they're executing all day, every day. So they don't have time to meet with every startup that comes along. So they can flip those over to ZBox and we can kind of give them a first look, vet the product, vet the founders, sort of give a very summarized overview back to the partner about what this startup could potentially do for them. And so we get a lot of startups coming that way. And of course, social media and other channels work too. So far, at least, for the first 8 or 9 months of our existence in the US, we haven't had spend a lot of time doing outbound and researching the startups. We do attend, most of the major events. So we meet a lot of founders that way, just whether it's Manifest or Freight Waves or Journal of Commerce, TPM, these are the types of places that we like to be seen and also see others. So those are kind of the ways that we're looking for startups. And, hopefully there's some great startups out there listening to this podcast today that we can get in touch with and see if we can help them out as well. Yeah,
just another channel, but it sounds like the flywheel is turning, either way. So there's a lot of good and strong team, by the way, too. That's impressive business for a lot of reasons. I like that a lot. You did mention.
Thank you.
So from our last conversation, it's a bit of a hack because it was nowhere in your bio, but I just know this to be true. You were very early at Cargomatic in terms of when you started there, and I want to talk about that because probably just selfishly, but definitely early days, I was a pretty big fanboy of what Cargomatic was doing, and I say that just to sort of set the frame, and maybe I will ask you to kind of elaborate further on this. But my own 2 cents was remind me again, when was Cargomatic first sort of making headlines in terms of being a business? Is that like 2012, 2013 maybe? Am I remembering that accurately?
Yeah, so the team came together in 2012.
Yeah.
When the two co-founders, Jonathan Kessler and Brett Parker, were introduced by a mutual friend over a dinner. And Jonathan, of course, this brilliant technologist from Silicon Valley. Brett, this guy who had spent his entire lifetime in 3PL and transportation at the Triangle Group, came together and started talking about Uber and some of the advancements in technology that have come out recently. They both agreed that Uberizing trucking made a lot of sense. So they started working on the project late 2012. I got involved early in 2013 when it was still just the two co-founders having these conversations in warehouses and apartments.
Yeah, so that right. so that era. So as things started to trickle out about what they were, I think at that time, for those of sort of my vintage or older, and if you were into supply chain, especially technology, and we were starting a product pre-Rose Rocket. So this is before Rose Rocket Day. We'd started a company called Freight Next, which ultimately failed, but that was somewhat the genesis to Rose Rocket. So there's a crisis in every, or opportunity in every crisis type thing. But I was really, so it was becoming, it was an obvious conclusion that people are going to start making a run at Uber for freight. Although it's more complex to move freight than people, which sounds counterintuitive, but in fact it's again, anyone in this industry knows what that means when I say that. You could see that coming. It was an obvious endpoint. What I thought was brilliant about Cargomatic was it was based on because the first thing you're thinking about is, okay, cool, have all these like long haul trucks and flying all over the United States and sort of the spider web that is the interstate network and all the different facilities, and try to match freight with carriers, sort of broker disruption, if you will. To get from, going back to that initial statement, from 0 to 1 for that is it's like impossible, basically. Some are doing it. I would argue that no one's really done it quite yet perfectly. But what was brilliant about Cargomatic, I thought, and oftentimes it's the ideas that seem simple are most brilliant, was that it was concentrated. You're just correct me where I'm wrong, but my perception was it was concentrated in Los Angeles, and it was cartage, basically. Within like local delivery and pickup, and that can work. There's more density of drivers. There's more density of customers. The turnarounds are quicker. The need for tracking is relatively moot because you're delivering stuff same day or next day. So you don't have these, where is my stuff 5 days later type thing. It just felt like that was the right play to do that. So from the outside looking, and also I think for your driver, contingency was cool to use a mobile app to kind of run their business or do the things there. Now I'm sure there was some friction with that because apps are tough in the market. So from the outside looking in, though, I said, "Shit! Like this is gonna work to this end. This was the right play, the right start. And if I was smart enough, exactly where I would have started." So take me back to that time. So the world of us are looking in there and saying, "Cool, this is gonna work." Talk to me about some of the real like behind the scenes stuff that was particularly challenging that you had to do, because I can only imagine all of the monkeys balancing plates on unicycles behind the scenes to make something like that actually, work in the early days in that 0 to 1. So can we kind of talk a little bit about 0 to 1 and some of the challenges and successes and maybe some, kind of neat stories that kind of came up during that time that you think of?
Yeah, as you can imagine, I could probably talk for days about this.
Sure,
but
sure.
I think a few of the just funny the way the universe works is so I had met Brett Parker, who's the co-founder, and he was like the operations like freight guy. And he and I did some business together when I owned a freight brokerage company, and his father owned a warehousing business. So whenever I needed product like stored in a warehouse, I would send it up to Brett's warehouse. He's like my warehousing guy in Los Angeles. And about the time I started working with Brett, like 2011, 2012, I was really always like, I was running these kind of analog, traditional 3PL businesses. I had a freight brokerage company and I had a global freight forwarding business at the time. I was running them side by side. And I was just always feeling like, when tech comes back around, because we were on the tail end of the economic bust, venture capital had not come back to life yet. I just really wanted to be positioned to do something in technology for the industry when the industry rebounded. And so as an entrepreneur, I spent a lot of my own time like just being curious. And I finally started going to like startup meetup events. And I paid for my own way to go up to a startup event in San Francisco in 2012, early 2012. And I was standing in a line for taxis. And, I'm a pretty big fella. And I like generally in a taxi line at that age, early 20s, mid 20s, I used to just kind of go stand in front of people and kind of like hold up my hand and try to like be bigger than them and see if I can get a cab. But it wasn't working. And finally, I saw some guy pull out his phone, and a couple of minutes later, a black car came and picked him up. And I'm surrounded by people who are looking for a car, but he had a car that was looking for him. I was like, "Man, how did you do that?" And he like holds up his phone. And he goes like, "It's the Uber. Download the Uber app." And then I was like, "Oh shit, okay." So that night, I downloaded the app and I called up a black car and I took a ride to dinner. And I was like, "Man, this is amazing!" Instantly, just like unlock. I know this is going to change the world. So on my own, I'm going back to San Diego, where I was living at the time, running my companies. And every spare minute I had, I'm like on YouTube trying to figure out how to make a pitch deck, how to raise venture capital. But I still had no idea like how I wanted to like do this Uber thing. I just knew I wanted to be a part of it. And then Brett tried calling me a few times, sent me a couple of text messages, but like most logistics guys, I was just down in the weeds all the time. No time for business development or innovation. And then finally, Brett caught me at my desk late one night, and I answered the phone thinking it might be my wife, and it was Brett. He said, "Look, like I've got this idea. I want to get you involved." And I was like, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "Have you heard of Uber yet?" I was like, "I love Uber. I want to make Uber for trucking." And he said, "Don't. We already made it." And I was like, "No kidding." So the next day I drove to Los Angeles. I met Brett in a warehouse. He showed me the app. He had it out, or he showed me the desktop site. He had the app in a driver's hands. He was driving around Los Angeles. It was elegant. It was working. And I said, "How do I get involved?" And he said, "Well, we know you're the go-to-market guy. You can kind of hire salespeople, write sales scripts and everything from my background at Worldwide Express." So he said, "We need somebody with your background to kind of like help us as a consultant to figure out how to sell this." So I signed up. We did a 3-month consulting contract. The very first week, I drove back up to Los Angeles. We're kind of writing through the scripts. And then, it was just obvious that those two co-founders probably weren't going to be the guys to go door to door and try to get this off the ground. So I said, look, I'll try it, but I want to come on. Like, I want to join you guys. And they had nobody else on the team at that point. The third co-founder, Martin Hendelman, was still just kind of writing code like on the side for them. And so I joined. I was employee number 1. The first day I went door to door selling the product. And really all I would do is walk in and say, hey, my name's Charley. I'm with Cargomatic. We're the Uber for trucking. Have you heard of Uber? And anybody that had heard of Uber immediately would stop what they're doing and say, like, what are you making? Now, I wasn't just walking into like flower shops and stuff like this. I was walking into customs house brokers, 3PLs, warehouses, places where I knew there was going to be palletized freight. And so, that first day I got 8 signups and I moved 1 load. And so it was a really, really exhilarating feeling. And to go 0 to 1, going back to your kind of like initial statement, that I just felt so weightless. And I'd already started at Worldwide Express. I had started cold start offices where I'd have to go, just go to a new market and get it off the ground. When I started my freight brokerage company, I did it out of my apartment. When I started my freight forwarding business, I did it very experimentally out of the back of my freight brokerage company. So the reality is I'd never been well capitalized and supported on any kind of a startup project before. But of course, at Cargomatic, when we went to raise our first round of venture capital in early 2013, nobody had raised any VC money in the trucking space. So I think that's why guys like you and guys like me were so infatuated with this concept, because we were the first guys to like get into TechCrunch for raising a seed round and taking proper venture capital in Silicon Beach. And so in those early days, everything was driven by the metrics. Everything was driven by how can we double this week over last week. So to talk, to address kind of your hamster on the wheel, discussion. I mean, there was a lot of late nights and early mornings of getting into the office. As the sales guy, I would be talking to the product team, giving them an idea. They could quickly like storyboard this idea, get it in the hands of the engineers. And sometimes by the time I was back in the evening after knocking on doors all day, they would have a new product built. So there was a lot of energy put into the software side. But in those early days, like, it doesn't matter what you're building. If you have a customer who's paying the bill, you've got to build their part first. Everything else gets sacrificed. And it was really unfortunate because later on, after I'd left, maybe 2015 or 16, there was some really negative publicity that got out about Cargomatic. And my read on it was some, disgruntled employee who was frustrated with the trucking industry more so than they were frustrated with anything that Cargomatic was doing. But, there were some accuracies in these reports as well. There was a Business Insider report that talked about, Cargomatic was using an off-the-shelf TMS, and that was absolutely true. It didn't make sense to go build a fully baked out TMS to serve 2 or 3 back office operations people.
I don't blame
when
them.
We had 10 or 15 customers that were begging us for features on the front end.
Yeah.
So, in those early days, as you well know, you have to make trade-offs and you have to sacrifice, certain things. And so in those days, everything was customer facing, VC facing. How do we get the vanity metrics right? Yeah. And ultimately, I think it led to kind of like some of the stumbles that Cargomatic took. But, I'm happy to tell you that they're a multi-billion-dollar company now. They're moving a lot of freight, have many, many blue chip customers. And the new leadership has done nothing but a fantastic job with that business. And I'm still a proud shareholder today.
They've done also a really nice job at going from, I want to click on a few things around there. And so maybe I'll start at the kind of beginning and work my way back to what I was about to say. One, you're absolutely right. I remember actually the number maybe, I tend to remember these things. So I think it was a $12 million round that was announced. It was the Series A. And that was the first. That was, even you used the term Silicon Beach. That wasn't even a term then. That became a thing later. That was just Santa Monica. Like that was just Long Beach, wherever you guys were, right? That was just that area. And I think that I remember that Series A, and it is interesting. It shows time now that's you don't see too many. Well, today's a different day, but going back, let's go back in time a year. That's a small Series A now, but that was a pretty meaningful round of financing back there in that space. And I think it's of course, like, because the other thing that's missing from this is that there is this technology, there's this product, there's the customers that are paying, but you also had to get the freight picked up. Like there was still the actual execution of the logistics going on. So it wasn't just a digital experience, it was a digital interface that was enabling a transportation experience that was still physically pick up the freight, physically get it there, don't be late, don't get in an accident, give me the right rate, what do you mean you don't have a tailgate? All the actual things that happen in that sort of the day-to-day. So you've also got this hand-to-hand combat stuff going on all day long on the side of, and they also need this, widgie nut feature over here before they can run their business on. It's like, well, Jesus, we need enough trucks to satisfy the demand, or we need enough freight to keep the trucks. Like two-sided marketplaces are no joke. And so making sure you have enough freight to satisfy a growing trucker contingency, because there's no freight, they don't care, they're not engaged. They have the app, they don't get a load for 4 days, they're gonna stop looking at it. So they're balancing all of the actual freight, and the execution of that on top of building that product is immense. And it's so leading me to, it's unfortunate that somehow the idea of, now again, if it was presented in one way, I think it's unfortunate sometimes how we feel like we have to be everything from the beginning. Like you have to have your own fully built TMS. Look, we've been building a TMS at Rose Rocket for the better part of 6 years. It's not finished. We've put, anybody you can look on, you can see how much money we've raised. We have put tens and tens of millions of dollars into this. Like that's not something you do as like a sidebar. Like that's not a side hustle in a business. And so it's a friggin' ERP system. So using off that is a wise decision for scaling the thing you want to scale. And you know what? Later on down the road, when you raise $1 billion in a huge company, yeah, go ahead and build it yourself again. But that's not an early stage thing you should be doing anyway. And that's really, and that's difficult again in the startup space. And maybe I'm being a little bit passionate about this because this is something we have to deal with, I think, all the time to a degree, is that you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. You go ahead and build that TMS. All your resources are there. You're not building anything for anybody. So your hand slapped on that. Oh, you don't own all the technology. You're not a technology company. You're a brokerage. Therefore, now we're going to value like a brokerage. Like, fuck off. Like, so it's like pick your thing. Like this is the path that we're going on, right? To get us there. So yeah, that's too bad that was looked at as a negative narrative, because there's no other way to do that business early days than do it that way. And that was the right decision. And it's really unfortunate that became, a poison to a degree, I guess.
Just your kind of rant there was much appreciated, and also just really resonated in so many areas. Because in these days, I had 2 companies that I was running. They were profitable and they're affording my lifestyle. My wife was my business partner, and I would leave on Monday morning with my 2 young sons at home, 2 dogs, 2 companies, leave it all on my wife. And I would go up to Marina Del Rey. We were in this like nasty little beach house, kind of a few blocks from where Snapchat was at the time. And I would sleep on an air mattress in the office during the week. And I'd come home on Friday morning, and all week long, I would have to go sign up a shipper, but then I'd have to quickly recoil and figure out how to move the freight, which meant most of the time I'd probably go to St. George or one of these other CFSs in Los Angeles. I would stand there with business cards. I would go down the line of trucks that were waiting to get loaded, and I would jump up and I would knock on the door of every white box truck that I could find and ask them, like, do you have a smartphone? If the answer was yes, I'd say, have you heard of Uber? If the answer was yes, I would say, we've built an Uber app for local trucking. We're looking for carriers. So the problem we had is like the guys that would find us online, or they'd read our press release, or they'd hear about us in TechCrunch, these drivers would get really excited and they had a smartphone, but they didn't own their own asset yet. So they were just getting going in their career. So the younger generation hadn't taken over the cab yet. And then many of these guys that own the trucks or had 5 or 6 or 10 trucks that could really help us out had flip phones. So there was this weird dichotomy back then in 2012, 2013, early 2014, where the market wasn't quite ready for this solution yet. But going back to one of the things you asked earlier, just about kind of like the short haul focus, it's not that we didn't try everything else, Justin. We did. Yeah. It's that the short haul, we found all these dynamics in short haul that you already touched on. And, Brett and I, as kind of like freight experts, we're already aware of this. We already knew that cartage and local trucking was its own thing. What we didn't know was how big that space was at the time, because it had all been covered up and rolled into revenues inside of these big freight forwarders. Because usually any move within like 50 miles of a port is going to be tacked on to something that some international freight forwarder is doing for some international client. And there's margin upon margin upon margin upon margin. So I'll never forget when some of the big 3PLs and brokerages started leaning in on what we were doing and paying attention, and coming out, giving us the old, "Hey, we're interested in investing," or maybe in buying you. But really, what they were doing was scraping us for every piece of information we had. But as we started to gather more information around that local market, we realized like we were tapping into something that was really, really significant. So when we launched a product for enterprises, and we offered a $35 pallet anywhere in Southern California, it just, the floodgates opened up. So it was just quite an interesting time to be experimenting with aggregating capacity, developing shippers, hiring freight people in the beach area of Los Angeles, which wasn't very easy to do. Building a company on top of, all of these other things that we're adding at a regular basis while simultaneously fundraising. There was a lot of late nights for the founders, myself, and just a lot of just like really, really memorable pitch sessions at kosher steakhouses. I think we pitched every single Jewish person on the west side of LA looking for money in that first round. Just so happened that we got this nice little niche of supportive investors, and one guy would introduce us to his friend, and that's kind of how we pieced the first couple of $1 million of funding together. And then by that time, of course, like some of the VC relationships had started to take shape. But those early days, it was interesting because there was Uber for everything, right? Like Uber for dry cleaning, Uber for food delivery, and a lot of investors, particularly the LA-based investors, they really wanted to see us kind of like scale alongside this dry cleaning company that. Don't get me wrong, like the dry cleaning company has been out of business now for eight years, probably because they followed this investor's advice. But, all these competing priorities in those days made it just like almost like hell on earth, but a time that I would never trade.
Yeah. I had the good fortune of having Jordan, actually a former CEO of TriumphPay, who you introduced me to, actually.
It's an amazing guy.
Show. Really is. And actually, but it was something interesting that just came through there as you were telling me that story. So when he was describing first starting up, and I'm not going to remember the name, but they had a sort of a grocery delivery startup business that him and his wife had started in a particular kind of high tourist region of Florida. And again, this wasn't intentional, but I guess this is just when I can see why you guys get along. There's kind of a triangle. Like the three of us are very, very similar in the way that we think about the world, and the way our experiences actually came to us through real, on the ground, do stuff that doesn't scale, and then some. And so he was describing his wife. They had to get these SKUs up so they had if you traveled to this one particular place in Florida, they were going to do grocery delivery because the thesis was, when you're on vacation, you're going to pay more, or you don't care as much about these things. So they kind of looked at it maybe as a high margin opportunity. But they had to get the SKUs up on the website so people could order stuff. And his wife, he said, had to go to Walmart and scan 5,000 SKUs with like a baby, on her, just trying to get the inventory on site so people had things to buy and they could have pricing and all the stuff understood. And so two things sort of jump out is that when you were talking about the things that were happening in the early days, and you had 2 dogs, 2 kids, 2 businesses, and you go down to start this startup, up here, it's like our wives are absolute bosses in terms of what they can actually accomplish. It's unbelievable, because they're like, you just left your wife, you're like, no problem, you just do like 90% of the stuff. You're like, oh, it was like so hard, I was doing all this stuff, but she's running 2 going concern businesses that they're paying the bills at this point, realistically, running the kids, and it sounds like you've got 2 great kids. It's, and she's obviously put her time in there. And dogs are a lot of work too. And then the house and the groceries and the cooking, all the stuff that goes on there. And then Jordan's wife, kind of similar. So, behind a lot of this is, make no mistake, there's good spouses, and in this case, the women behind us, I'd say the 3 of us even, I'll speak to mine, it's, you're not doing any of this without them, right? So just as a shout out to sort of the women it was Father's Day yesterday, but
Love you, Katie. Thank you.
Yeah, man. And I almost feel like on Father's Day, even for me, it's like I feel almost embarrassed about it. It's like I don't really feel like I need a day here. I feel like life is pretty peachy for me most of the time. I don't really need an extra pile on here. Let's just keep things the way they are. And it's kind of every day is, Father's Day in some ways. But yeah, it really is impressive. I think the women behind the founders or the co-founder women are just their capacity is unmatched. It's unrivaled in terms of what they can do. I'm forever impressed with these stories.
Well, I mean, you hit it on the head. Like, you couldn't be you, I couldn't be me if our wives weren't there.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. It's like, I don't even want to guess where I would be. That's actually a pretty scary thought. So yeah.
It's a dark thought. I try to stay out of that. My therapist advises me never to even think about that. So
my grade 9 gym teacher had said to me, he said, Bailey, he's like, you're either going to be a millionaire or going to be in jail. It's probably both. So I've, well,
you still have time.
Well, I was going to say we'll see on both fronts, but So and and the other side to that is just again, it's just the stuff that you need to do in that 0 to 1. That is, it's not about the technology. Those early days, I think there's this idea that it's like product will solve all. And you kind of just put this technology and it does the work, but the stuff behind it, executing the scanning the codes, finding the trucks, finding the freight, it's just. Yeah, that's really the beginning. And I think for people who are, thinking about startups or maybe intimidated by the idea of entrepreneurship, I think one of the things that can be very intimidating is it seems like such a long path between where you are and that you can kind of visualize, oh, if I build this thing, it'll do this magic thing. But it seems like such a long way away. But the reality is, even the starting point to the technology, it shouldn't really, that's not, because that in of itself can be overwhelming. It's like, how do I find people to write code? Or how do I raise money to build tech? It's like, you just need to prove something, and largely that's going to be a manual, non-scalable effort to prove a thing. Like it's not normally, the technology is not going to be the selling point in most cases, assuming you're not a technology, centric person, you're not an engineer or something. So I think that can be somewhat daunting, but also encouraging for, people who want to be entrepreneurs, in that it's not just about the technology in early days. In fact, you can prove the business right or wrong, probably before you even write a line or any of code. So anyway, just my own, it's this theme seems to be popping up throughout multiple interviews I'm doing on the show around just, again, strong women and do things that don't scale early days. So those are
well, I think to add to that, like one common theme is like, before you can leave your wife behind and put all the work on her, and before you can even dream up the technology that you like to build or even have the idea, I think what separates the entrepreneurs from the people that actually get things done is some of us have this curse of curiosity.
Yeah.
And like just tugging at the string is enough to get us to wake up the next day. And I'm a little bit unique in that I started my career with this growing company, and I really learned how to be an entrepreneur as a sweat equity person. I was very lucky at Worldwide Express. It was franchise based when I joined, and I worked for guys that lived out of town that frankly didn't want to fly across the country or fly across the world to run the franchises. So I got to be this guy at 22, 23 years old that learned how to run a company. But it's always been my natural curiosity that has just always plagued me with these new ideas. And it's why I have a hard time saying no to new challenges, because whether it's a new advisory role or making this angel investment or trying this new path here at ZBox, if it looks like there's potential there, I always remember this phrase that the fruit is never at the base of the tree. It's always out on the edge of the limb. Mm-hmm. And I think some of us just can't help ourselves, but keep crawling until we, grab a hold of something. And so, amen. God bless those people that pick one problem, they settle into it and they solve it, and then they're done for the rest of their life. I just don't think there's ever such a thing as done.
No, my therapist calls it novelty-seeking behavior. So there's a bit of a shiny object though. But I mean, I think there's a quadrant of personalities, and I'm in that same quadrant. I think for me, when I think about entrepreneurship in early days, it was probably forged out of I don't think it's arrogance, but so I want to be careful the way that I say this, but I kind of would end with this conclusion is, and be wrong half the time, by the way, with this conclusion is, I can do this better. That's actually sort of the drive for me for a lot of the things. It's this is super inefficient. This is a poor experience. There are businesses that are not in this space, but are parallel in terms of you can see a corollary like Uber and Uber for Freight type thing, and that would work over here maybe. It's just this sort of desire to make things better. That's kind of the drive for me, but I think that comes from, say, the same thing. It's this curiosity of just okay, then what does that look like? And then just getting psycho rabbit hole around, unit economics and the people and the players and the competition. I mean, I don't have to go on. You know exactly what happens when that match is lit. It's pretty hard to stop the fire. Do you ever find that challenging? Like, do you ever find that to be counterproductive? Like you lack focus, or like does it harm you in any way? Do you find?
Well, I'd say earlier in my life, like certainly, when I started I played college football through college. So like I had that framework and that just like consistent, be here at this time, get this done, do this thing, or lose your scholarship. So like very, very high cost of failure there. So that got me through school. When I got out of school, I think Worldwide Express is the perfect company for me to go to work for, because they gamified the shit out of the way we did our jobs. Yeah. Like they went on the very first interview and they showed you, after walking you around for a full day in a business park, wearing a suit, sweating, everything off, they would show you, hey, if you just do that 50 times a day, you should get 5 leads. You should set 2 appointments. You should close 1 deal. And if you do that for 1 year, you'll be making $100,000. Yeah. So mathematically, they gave this logic that was so sound. And then when you join, every week, the ranking numbers are out. So it was just like playing sports. How did I do? What are my metrics? What's my average? All these things, right? So I think like when I was young, Worldwide Express kept me so focused on Worldwide Express, there was no time for anything else. When I became an entrepreneur and then all of a sudden I had nothing but time, there was moments where my wife would leave to go do her sales job so that she could actually pay the bills and keep a roof over our head. And I'm sitting there with my laptop on my lap going like, man, like I can't go down the Facebook rabbit hole. This is like 2008, 9. So should I look for a job today or should I go find a new customer, Yeah. And then once I get that first bit of momentum, you get that first customer. Well, now it's like you got a boss again. And then that just kind of fuels the flywheel. So I do see people's natural curiosity throw them off course. For me, as a father of 3 boys now and a husband to this woman who has like mortgaged everything in her life and her entire identity to raise our children and support me through these endeavors, that inherently like keeps me focused every single day on what's important right now. What's the next most important step in the mission? And a lot of times, when you start to get overwhelmed, you start to think about like, man, I want to be all the way up there, but right now I'm down here. I had this great mentor at Worldwide Express, this guy named Joe Judson, who was just like such a dynamo of helping grow that company and just somebody who like really made a meaningful difference in my life. And I remember one night, like a late night conversation, when he said, Charlie, you know what makes me better than most guys? I'm like, what? He's like, because when most guys see all the way up there and they know that's where they want to be, they get stressed out and worried and they stop trying. But I think like, if I want to be up there, then today I need to get there. The next day I need to get there. And it's that step by step, chunk by chunk, that framework that I learned at a young age that keeps me going, because like, just like you, to get from 0 to 1, you have to like deal with failure like nobody's business. But then you have to you might not have like champagne and a steak dinner on those little wins, but you certainly find that time in the car where you're like, oh shit, man, we got our first response to an email today. Yeah. Or, oh yeah, that guy agreed to meet with us. Like he sounds interested. And like, I get goosebumps thinking about these little tiny things. And so it's what I find inspirational now about coaching startups. It's the same reason why I love coaching kids in sports, is like, nobody gets where they want to be in one fell swoop. Anything worth trying takes time. Or worth achieving takes time. And a lot of times what I find with founders is like, do they need some help kind of on their deck composition? Do they kind of need some help thinking through their cap table? Could they use some introductions to VCs? Yes, all of these things. But most often, man, they just need hey, brother, you're doing a great job. Or, you know what? That is good shit right there. It doesn't feel like it right now, but you need to hold your head high. You need to rest well tonight. And if I'm around them, I'll give them a hug, or I'll give them a virtual high five. But most of the time, all of us just need somebody to say, dude, don't be so hard on yourself. Yeah. Love yourself, trust yourself. You're doing fine. And that's the joy that I find in life, is just sharing that with people and seeing the weight of the world lift off their shoulders and know that, hey, they're coming back to give it hell tomorrow because they didn't quit today. They didn't die. Yeah.
That's great, man. And I think there's something much, the idea of giving a hug versus a virtual high five is much more cathartic. So, good for you on the actual hug. I will say, sort of to that point, when I look back, right, it's funny, again, I find our timelines interesting. I don't know how close we are in age, but it feels like everything was happening. Like you were kind of talking about, you were in California around, so that 12 and 13, I was it's interesting. I was like really gearing towards going there at that time for the similar reasons. We're both in this very similar I don't know. It's interesting. It feels like we've kind of followed the ebbs and flows of the industry almost like in corollary between us when you're timing. So back in this like 08, 09 period, very similar experience for me. I was I was sort of lost in terms of I'd run some businesses. They kind of worked, kind of hadn't. Like I knew I was an entrepreneur because I was relatively unemployable. But I didn't really. I was young. I was 28, 29. At that time, or a bit younger, I guess. And it's funny. So the where I'm going with this is the failure that I actually had at that moment was I had to get a job. I had 2 kids at that point. I maybe even had 3 almost, and I couldn't pay the bills, and they were young kids. And so even, my wife at the time, she couldn't, her capacity was limited in terms of we had 3 kids under 3 at one point. We had 3 kids that were like 3.5 years old and down. Like it was just like, it was bedlam, right? So I had to get a job, but where did I end up working? I ended up working at YRC. So I took that job and I went and worked in trucking. And so it was like, that was my fail. That was where I was kind of humiliated as an entrepreneur, having to go and do the worst thing an entrepreneur can do is get a job. But I think I will share that was the best thing I could have done, because since then I've been in this industry, which has given me so much. I mean, everything I have really is because of the transportation industry professionally anyway. Even my current wife now, I met her trying to sell her software. Trucking software. This is I met her at an event first, but at trucking event. So this has given me everything. And I think that what felt like a failure at the time. So I guess, out to the community of those, sometimes when you are stuck, what may seem like a failure or that next step, and it maybe feel like a step backwards, it's like we sometimes just need to retrench to kind of accelerate us for later. Recognize that life is seasons. And you may need to just, kind of get through the winter, if you will, because the spring will come again, And so I think sometimes we can also get very focused and overly maybe critical of ourselves based on what we think we are, the stories we tell ourselves. I'm an entrepreneur, so therefore I must, only work for myself and have all the success and look like the people. But it's like, no, man. You can take multiple journeys to get there, and there's ups and downs, and I think to your point there, don't be so hard on yourself. It's actually okay that if you're taking this time because you have no idea what type of explosion of opportunities are going to come as a result of that. So I
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more about these points. I think many times we are, as driven type A people, we're our own worst enemy, and it's that self-doubt, that self-talk. So I think it's critically important, for young entrepreneurs, the best thing you can do is reach out to people cold. Yeah. Go on LinkedIn, look at somebody who has the experience that you're coveting and see if they'll talk to you. Because one thing I see is that the higher you get on the food chain in terms of corporate, org charts, the more generous people are. Why? Because they're good at their day job. They already have it nailed. And if they're an entrepreneur themselves, or they think they can help somebody else, people want to help. Yeah. So I think it's critically important that you find, if you're doubting yourself and then the people around you, your friends, family, they're doubting you, find other people. Be around people that want to lift you up, people that want to challenge you. Find a place where you can go to work every day where there's other people building, so you can share these experiences. And most importantly, find a mentor. If you can get a mentor, somebody who's walked a mile in those shoes, you're going to be better off. And, something that, I've just started doing recently, as a father, and a husband is I've started spending time in therapy, just going to talk to somebody else about the road that I'm walking every single day. And one of the messages that we talk about all the time is that I'm way too hard on myself, and any pressure that I'm feeling is most of the time self-manufactured. And I didn't go there because I felt broken or lost. But then once you start talking about things, you realize we're all broken and lost. You have to forgive yourself for that, and then just put your shoes on and go to work the next day, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, no, I'm there, and a big supporter of in therapy for most of probably the last 5 years, and it's one of the most critical, important things that I do for that exact reason, and staying on track. And I find even when I don't go, so I go every 2 weeks to totally get into the weeds on this. And there's some periods where I go every week because I feel like I need it more. But when I feel like I go a month, sometimes, I'll go on holidays and I miss it. It's like, I feel that, I notice that now if I don't go for that period of time. So there's there's sort of a regular cadence just to keep me grounded. And yeah, anyone who hasn't done it and is thinking there's just no reason not to, except for, economic reasons, which, again, there's been points in my life where I couldn't have afforded that too. I think that is becoming more accessible. So I think to your point, Charley, that there is, if you don't have the resources to access therapy at this point in your life, then there are people around. I think even what you're saying almost there is, there's no shame in asking for help. In fact, that takes a very strong, mature individual to be able to do that. That's actually a very hard thing to do. And that takes an awful lot of courage, an awful lot of maturity to ask for help. And it doesn't have to be paid. It can come from many different sources and places. So
here's a good anecdote to this is on my journey at Cargomatic, when it was causing stress and strife in my life, I remember talking to my wife and saying, look, number one, our businesses are paying the bills, but having this extra paycheck is helpful. Number two, this equity is going to be valuable. But three, and most importantly, someday some guy is going to go on my LinkedIn and see that I was one of the guys that helped start Cargomatic, and he's going to call me and ask me for help, and that's going to be important to me. Yeah. The first guy to call me and ask me for help was a guy named Dan Lewis up in Seattle. This was in 2015. I spent 15 or 20 hours maybe over the course of 5 conversations with or 5 to 10 conversations with Dan, and he's gone on to build Convoy. Yeah. And the reality is if somebody as smart as Dan Lewis, who is one of the smartest people I've ever been around in my entire life, if he needed 5 to 10, discussions with me, imagine all the other discussions that this guy had before he launched Convoy. And so if that's not a great example of why you should call and ask people for help and just be very, very courageous and bold with your asks and simple and clear with your asks, if that's not a great example, I don't know what is.
That is an excellent way to wrap up the show, man. I feel like I could talk to you forever. I could looked at the clock. I'm like, oh my God, we're over time here. And I feel like I'm just getting started. I didn't ask you any questions that I had written down. That's exactly how I knew this would go, though. And I warned you, listeners, that this is how this would go. That was amazing for me. Often when I'm doing these shows, it's hard for me to actually remember even what we talked about. I have to listen back to be like, what did we actually do here? So feels really good, though, in my heart. I feel like we did a really nice service here, if nothing else. And so I hope we've helped someone. Listen, man, we should talk. We've got other things to talk about anyway offline. So let's connect over some of those outstanding items. And in the meantime, enjoy France as you should, and most people do. And we'll talk soon, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin. To all your viewers, I really appreciate you guys. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Google my name. I'm easy to find.
Thank you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast too. Be well.